Welcome to this explainer. Look, if you're in luxury hotel management, you already know the ground is shifting beneath our feet. We're moving away from that old-school checklist-based luxury, the kind where success is measured by how fast someone answers the phone or brings up an extra towel. We are entering the era of invisible orchestration. The days of loudly showing off how hard your team is working for a guest, they're totally over. The future actually belongs to the properties that can make all that effort just completely disappear. To really get a feel for this, picture this for a second. You're sitting on a beautiful, quiet terrace late in the afternoon. You're just taking in the soft weight of the silence, the lighting is absolutely perfect, and then, out of nowhere, a Negroni, made exactly the way you secretly hoped for, just appears at your table. You didn't have to wave down a reader, you didn't awkwardly flip through a leather-bound menu, the moment just materialized right in front of you. In that exact moment, there were absolutely no questions asked, no annoying confirmations, none of that typical clunky choreography of service. Nobody interrupted you to say, "Excuse me, would you care for a drink?" or "Let me just repeat that order back to you." Nope, everything was simply exactly as it should be. And that right there, that is the frictionless experience of true modern luxury. It's no longer about providing more service. It's actually about engineering less need for it. Okay, let's hit section 1. The end of visible service, from reacting to orchestrating. Let's really dig into this shift from just reacting to problems to actually orchestrating the whole vibe. What we're trying to do here is engineer a continuous, completely uninterrupted state for the guest. Look, for decades, hospitality systems have been obsessed with speed and responsiveness, right? But this new model removes the friction entirely. Think about it. Your guests shouldn't ever have to ask for an early check-in. It should just be handled before they even land. They shouldn't have to re-explain their dietary restrictions every single time they sit down for breakfast. Their individual needs have to be met and resolved before they even have the chance to form as a conscious thought. Which brings us to section 2, feeling over physical amenities, the return of emotional resonance. This is where we hit that crucial realization that the physical stuff in your suites matters way less than the emotional imprint you're leaving behind. We are literally watching the traditional amenity list die out in real time. There's this massive divide now between the old way of selling luxury, bragging about suite features, 1,000-thread count sheets, and those standard welcome gifts, and the new benchmark, which is the emotional imprint. Modern luxury isn't defined by what's printed on a glossy brochure anymore. It's defined by the emotional resonance of how effortless the entire stay felt. It's all about giving them that profound, unshakable feeling of just being completely understood. So how do you actually build that kind of resonance? That's section 3, quiet architecture versus big systems, rethinking the hospitality framework. To pull this off, management really has to pivot away from those massive, heavy, reactive operations. We call this quiet architecture. It's an environment where hospitality isn't just delivered in isolated, transactional little moments. It's composed as one cohesive whole. Nothing feels like an add-on or a total afterthought because literally everything has already been considered. We see this thriving beautifully in high-end private villas and boutique properties. These are places where experiences are curated holistically around the actual person, rather than forcing a guest to conform to some rigid legacy hotel system. If you stack this up against traditional large-scale hotel operations, the divide is pretty staggering. The old way literally waits around for requests. It's addicted to visible checklists and rigid schedules. But this new quiet architecture, it's orchestrating everything effortlessly and invisibly in the background. You're replacing the clipboard and checklist with pure anticipatory orchestration. You're swapping out rigidly scheduled service for something that feels incredibly intuitive and almost organic. Moving right along to section 4, training for meaningful human connection, evolving staff roles. Obviously, making this jump requires a total overhaul of how we approach team training and daily directives. The operational pivot here is huge. Think about step 2 for a second, utilizing your tech systems strictly for backend coordination. If you let the technology handle the heavy lifting, the scheduling, the pattern recognition, crunching the data, you completely liberate your staff. And that makes step 1 possible. Your team breaks out of that mindless task management loop and actually starts forging real, intuitive, meaningful human connections with your guests. The endgame, step 3, is delivering service that is razor sharp but completely invisible. And just to be super clear here, the concierge role definitely doesn't disappear in this new model. Not at all. Instead, they evolve into this seamless, invisible layer that actively shapes the guest's entire environment without ever waving their hands and saying, "Hey, look what I did for you." It's honestly a brilliant, sophisticated evolution of the classic role. But of course, there's a catch. Let's look at Section 5, Anticipation without unwanted surveillance, Privacy as Experience Design. This level of super anticipatory service brings us to easily the most delicate operational hurdle you're going to face. It is the ultimate million-dollar question, isn't it? How on earth do we anticipate a guest's needs without making them feel surveilled? Because let's be real, it is a very, very fine line. The absolute hardest thing you have to figure out as a luxury manager is how to make a guest feel deeply, profoundly understood without ever crossing that creepy line into making them feel tracked or constantly observed. To dodge that invasive feeling, privacy can't just be something your legal team worries about. It has to be baked right into your core experience design. You've got to play by a few hard rules here. Personalization has to be transparent. The ultimate control over the experience always has to sit with the guest. And your team's discretion? It can't just apply to physical service anymore. It has to extend entirely to the guest's digital data itself. At the end of the day, absolute trust is the foundation that makes invisible luxury even possible. All right, Section 6, Case Study, the Personalized Memory, Human Touches over Suite Features. Let's break down a real-world case study that perfectly captures this whole paradigm shift. We're going to see what happens when you ditch the standard amenity list and replace it with a truly personalized guest memory. When you actually track the data and compare the impact of a suite's crazy expensive furniture or those generic champagne welcome gifts against something as remarkably simple as a genuine handwritten note or a perfectly curated local gift, the feedback is wild. It points 100% to the power of the human touch. Guests expect the fancy suite. They paid for the fancy suite, but they remember the thoughtful note because that note is undeniable proof that they were actually seen as a person. And honestly, that brings us right to the core thesis of this entire explainer. Your guests are rarely going to remember the complex choreography of your backend service. They are definitely not going to remember the bullet points on your expensive amenity list. But I promise you, they will never, ever forget that quiet, lingering feeling of being genuinely understood. True luxury is exactly that, the quiet feeling of having been truly seen. So as we wrap up this briefing today, I want to leave you with one final, pretty provocative thought to take back to your own properties. Ask yourselves this: if all your visible service completely disappeared tomorrow, what feeling would actually be left behind? Something to think about, right? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this helps you rethink the architecture of your own guest experiences.